any of you need to get in, you can give us a call on the toll-free line at 1-888-514-2100 or anywhere else in the international market at 001-858-268-3068. A couple things that I thought we could bring up. We used the last 20 minutes to kind of throw everything in the pot and kind of mix it around and see what comes up. One of the things that I thought was kind of something we could talk about was accidental reserve deployments close to the ground or just after takeoff. What do you do? I've never had this happen to me, but I have seen on 2 separate occasions guys launch and 20, 30 feet after they take off, their bag fall open, and now they got a parachute hanging out, and eventually it does open, and that creates a momentary glitch in your flying. So
it's more than a momentary glitch.
Yeah. In each of these instances, I was very fortunate to say that the pilots were able to come down and sustain no injuries. They were very, very fortunate, and I think part of it was because the glider was still flying and the parachute was still open, and so they came down probably abruptly, and of course they landed in a very unplanned manner. But the situation could escalate and could be a more serious problem, just because of the oftentimes what occurs at low level is a paraplaning effect. In other words, the parachute does open, the paraglider still remains flying, but the paraglider is going usually in one direction and the parachute going in another direction, and as a consequence, the landings come down rather hard. Murray, have you ever had that happen to you? I thought Murray was online. Murray.
Hi. That fits in nicely because that's one of the things which I'll be filming this year for Paraglider magazine for an article. Hence the mention on the radio earlier. Not this year, of course, earlier last year, where I did the 5 reserve deployments at low level.
Well, yeah, we've, like I say, I've witnessed it a few times, never had anything like this happen, but I know it's usually a pretty exciting ordeal for the pilot when they have to come down, and neither really having the full effect of the glider bringing him down softly or the parachute bringing him down softly. They drop down rather quickly and abruptly.
Well, that's where this particular article is specifically targeted. Now, this is not something we would normally recommend for a normal reserve deployment where you're at height. But when you're at a low-level height, as you've said there, and obviously when you phone in, you tend to lose 20 seconds of conversation, so hopefully this fits in. One of the problems is that by the time the reserve deploys, the wing starts to dive, and you get that initial oscillation. And what we found is that with most wings, if you actually hold them on the brakes and stop the wing from diving, now bear in mind that if this is an accidental deployment, it's deploying while the wing's still flying. Usually what happens is your reserve will drop backwards, and because it's not been thrown, and because you're not in a fast-moving, you're just moving at flying speed, it actually takes slightly longer to deploy, which means, generally speaking, the pilot has maybe 5 seconds to do something before you get the drag.
Yeah, I've thrown a bunch of reserves out over the water, and I've had this happen to me. And one of the problems is that when your descent rate is equivalent to the reserve's descent rate, so it's if you're not going down fast, then you really have to throw the reserve out there. Some of the container bags now, they're being built with a drogue chute or something like that integrated into it so that it can still catch some of the airflow and create a little bit of extra drag. But for the most part, you don't really your reserve doesn't really start to open until you've dropped past it, and you start to get some distance away from it.
Yeah.
So,
by that time you may be getting too close to the ground, so by the time you actually swing, do the rotation from the reserve being behind you, because as I say, you're flying normally, so you're not in an unusual attitude. As soon as the reserve stops the pilot, the wing continues moving on, and then you end up with the wing in front of you and the reserve behind you.
Yeah.
The wing dives down, and then you swing down and almost backwards under the reserve. Now that's where the pilot can end up slamming in the ground. So only for this very low-level situation. What we've found on the testing we've done so far, and there's still a lot more work to be done and we still have to do the photographs, is you're actually better continuing to fly the wing. Your reserve, if it's still in the deployment bag, may actually remain in the bag. So clearly you want to be concentrating. I would tend to recommend, if you're on a ridge site, you want to be heading into the hill rather than the conventional out, unless you can guarantee to get well clear with several hundred feet by just a few seconds flying.
Right.
The problem being that is in ridge lift, the wind is blowing you into the hill.
Yeah.
So it's one of the few circumstances where heading towards the hazard and reducing your altitude is actually the preferred option.
Yeah, I think I'm sure. I know I mentioned to you when I was out there with you. I said if I'm going to be doing something dangerous, I either got to be high enough where I got time to recover,
Yep.
or low enough where it's not going to hurt.
Yep.
Now, Murray, the interesting thing though is your glider, if it pitches forward like that on you, you're not going to stay there unless the reserve starts to open. So, and when it starts to open, unless you've got a poorly designed reserve, or for some reason your descent rate's not that high, once your reserve starts opening, it should be creating enough drag to start bringing you back beneath it before it
It's
gets
only
starts.
once it starts producing the drag that your wing actually goes forward.
Right.
What we found out was testing this between about 20 feet and 120 feet is that the reserve will drop down. Now you have one big danger there.
Yeah.
Unless you're on a perfect grass site, it's actually possible for the reserve underlines to hit the ground without it deploying,
Right.
and then you will stop flying very quickly.
Yes.
So as soon as your reserve is dropping out, you're either heading well clear if you're at a cliff site, so you can descend in the air without being in the wind under reserve as normal, or you're heading in, because once that hits the ground and drags you, you're going to stop flying very, very quickly.
Right.
So you actually want to cut in and take a tuck and roll. Now, assuming the reserve starts to deploy before it touches the ground, what will happen is it inflates, and then the mushroom, as it were, comes up to behind you, rises slightly beyond that point, and as it comes up, that is then when your paraglider starts to dive forwards. And even on the 2-3 vertex, with practice, you can actually hold it on the brakes, so only
You can
downplane a small amount.
Yeah.
If you don't let it dive, you're actually in quite a stable situation, because you're starting from a relatively low energy position,
Yeah.
a normal flying wing. This is totally different from normal reserve use.
The
And you
only
can actually descend.
I've practiced this a lot, and it does work, except if the canopy starts to oscillate a little bit.
Yep.
So if
Now-
you don't have just the perfect brake or de-riser
Exactly.
pressure, then it's going to be
Now,
trouble.
For that, what we recommended is, while you've still got the brakes and you're essentially flying on the brakes, you should be ready to beeline immediately.
Yes.
There's the slightest hint of an oscillation or a spin, because quite a common feature with this type of reserve deployment is the glider spins because you're asymmetric on the brakes. As soon as anything even looks like it's starting to happen, you want to make sure that your main is killed. And one of the best ways of doing that is beeline, because then all it is a drag device, and you will descend that 20-30 feet under both of them and onto the ground.
I agree. I agree.
For the big risk to always remember, you're flying a ridge site if you're in this hazardous situation. If you're up high, it's academic. You've got a reserve, you just go down under it. If you're flying a ridge site, that means there's ridge lift. That means there's wind. As soon as you're on the ground, you want to be killing your reserve.
Yeah.
Big advantage of the modern PDA design, you don't mess about going for any of the outside lines on the goers. Straight for the PDA center line, grab it, and kill.
Assuming it's not tangled up.
Assuming it's not tangled up.
Well,
Yeah, and of course the one thing is time. Time's working against you when you're this low to the ground. You don't
Hence
have
training.
much time. You can't really, you might have one shot to come back down, and hopefully, the other thing I think you might have mentioned, I just stepped out a minute ago, but the other thing that could happen, and that it wouldn't be unusual, is that the parachute actually drop and snag something on the ground.
Yeah.
And of course, then you're in for about a 30-foot fall.
Well, again, if you're looking at a beeline, in a beeline, a paraglider effectively becomes like a parachute and will descend at 1,500 feet a minute, which is the same rate as a parachute descends at. If you've got it parachutal, it's going straight down. It's not going forward, so you don't get swung. you actually just drop, slackening the lines on the reserve. So you really have to be prepared to take the safer, bad option, but still the safer option, of dropping vertically and losing any forward airspeed.
Right.
Accidental reserve deployments, the danger is moving forward through the air.
Right.
Yeah, the danger actually isn't dropping or falling straight down. The bigger danger is the pendulum into the ground.
Yeah.
And
that's what we were just talking about.
So you're absolutely right.
The pendular effect. This is something that you can hopefully avoid. Number one, you guys, if you have to toss your reserves, make sure you watch the bag. First, make sure you let go of the handle. Secondly, make sure you watch the bag as it deploys, because if it does hang for a moment, or if it does have problems because, I don't know, rubber bands are too tight or something, you can reach over, grab the bridle, and yank on it and shake it open. I've had to do that before. I've seen other pilots do that before, and it's a lot better than flying around with it kind of hanging below you, stuck in the container bag. The pendular oscillation that a lot of the reserves have comes from people flying either too heavy or too light on the reserve. The reserve is designed to carry a certain weight, and all of the reserve manufacturers will have a top placard weight posted. Unlike a normal paragliding wing, I would say that it is going to be a little bit more dangerous to fly heavy or light on a reserve. When you're flying heavy on it, because your sink rate's marginally higher, the canopy is going to be trying to reinflate and recover and start flying. When it's lighter, when you're lighter on the reserve and the wing loading is a lot lighter, you don't generally have to worry about your canopy flying up and coming up again. But the reserve has less pressure in it, and so it's going to be more prone to start the pendular oscillation when it hits, some thermals, some turbulence, some shift in the wind direction, and you as a pilot are much less stable hanging below it, if you're really, really light on it. So, if you haven't done this already, do try to get within the placard range of your reserve.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the clip-type carabiners rather than the screw-gate ones. And the first thing I would recommend to anybody if they're up high and they've got reserve deployment is reach up to the top of probably your B-lines. You've got your triangular aileron, clip it in to your carabiners. That way you cannot get spins, you cannot get surges with your main. Even if the main goes back above you, you're just under two reserves. The big danger which you see in a lot of video clips which are on the internet is you see the glider spinning, and as soon as the glider spins or surges, it's fighting the reserve. So you want to make sure you've got the easiest, laziest way of guaranteeing that your wing can only be a drag device, not a flying device.
Absolutely. Good points. Good points.
And next week's show?
Well, hopefully we're going to have some more information, maybe some more hyping and getting people excited about some of the towing operations that we've been involved in, and Gabriel's been involved in specifically. Have a lot of interest in that program. Since there's only a few people in the country doing it. And probably, I don't know, I was talking to some of the people, the students, we're planning on a Mexican trip here in the next 3 to 4 weeks, going down and flying. We start getting into our springtime conditions at some of the places we fly further down the ridge. One of the places we have planned probably around March or April will be the San Antonio Del Mar site, which is about a 10-mile ridge that we fly on a coastal wind day. It's one of the most beautiful places, pristine, way out in the wilderness, miles and miles from anybody. You get up in the air, you can see all around you, 50 miles in all directions. It's just amazing.
Well, we're certainly getting some spring conditions. The other day I was flying a site that's notorious in the west wind. We generally don't use it in the west wind. It's normally either a south or a north wind. And essentially from the hilltop you have a cliff, and right in front of the cliff you have a big wood. So you've got a perfect heat trap for punching off thermals. And with the Vertex, I had the first real big downdraft on one wingtip, so I lost about 50% of it the other day. Opposite weight shift, bounce on the brake, changed course by a couple of degrees, waited, and out it popped. So the thing is, for everybody to remember, keep ground training, keep kiting in the winter, whenever you get the decent days, get out there, get some practice, so when you're flying in the spring thermals, you're current, or as near current as you can be.
Absolutely, absolutely. And springtime, tends to be, at least here in Southern California, I know in a lot of places in Europe, you're going to see stronger lapses because the sun's starting to come up, stay up a little bit longer, get a little bit warmer, but you may still have snow in the mountains, and pilots for the most part will be a little bit less, or a little bit rustier because they haven't been out flying quite so much recently. So as Murray said, it's a great idea to spend some extra time getting the feel back.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be in the air, just kiting. Go out on a day when it's clearly thermic, it's a bit gusty, stay on the ground, nice flat field, and fly that wing, just holding above you, because when you're on the ground, the engine isn't fully on, the wing doesn't fly as well as it flies in the air. So if you can get yourself current, getting back into the feel of it, you've got to make yourself a lot safer when you are up there. And as Gabriel's saying, you've got the cold air and you've got the strong thermals, so you've got to really watch it.
Well, Murray, appreciate your call in. It looks like we're at the top of the hour, so it looks like the end of the Paraglider show. Another 2 hours just whizzed right by, and we still have more to talk about. We'll hope to stay tuned next week. This is David, Gabriel, and Murray Hayes from Scotland, and we appreciate your listenership, and we'll talk to you again next week. Signing off.